Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I rise to make my presentation on the 2016 budget presented by the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Winston Jordan. Let me, from the onset, extend my congratulations to the Minister for presenting two budgets within 6 months. The first being titled, A Fresh Approach to the Good Life in a Green Economy, and the second being titled, Stimulating Growth, Restoring Confidence, The Good Life Beckons. The common theme running through both is a realization, an aspiration of a good life. A good life has been the dream of our foreparents, and yet it is still elusive for many after spending their whole lives trying to make that dream of a good life a reality. Mr. Speaker, the Minister in his introductory statement referred to the 50 years since Guyana attained its independence, and I wish to quote page 1 when he said, "The path to peace and national reconciliation has been long and arduous, but we have weathered the storm to progress to where we are currently." He referred to some of the achievements and concluded that we must strive manifestly to keep it intact. End of quote. I believe all patriotic Guyanese share that lofty ideal of wanting to have a unified, prosperous, and peaceful country. In this, we must all take a united stand. These were the ideals of our young and vibrant leaders who wanted to replace colonial rule and domination with a young, independent state. They were full of motivation, and even though some may have not shared similar commitments to country and cause, the reality is that they challenged the status quo, which saw the emergence of the first political party in 1950 and universal adult suffrage and the winning of 18 out of 24 seats in the Legislative Council. As we observe, Mr. Speaker, our 50th anniversary of independence, I wish to recognize the contributions of Dr. Cheddi Jagan when in his capacity as Prime Minister of Guyana spoke at the opening of the Independence Conference in 1962 in London. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence in allowing me to quote from this important document, which I believe form an important part of our history. Once again, and I quote, "We meet to consider what course the political development of British Guyana shall take. This conference is the culmination of a long series of events. A quick glance at this series may, perhaps, be of use now to set our problem in perspective. In June 1958, the Legislative Council of British Guyana passed a resolution requesting that British Guyana should become an independent state within the Commonwealth. A Constitution Committee made up of all the elected and nominated members of the Legislative Council examined this question and set out the views of all sections of opinion at great length. The request for independence followed on a majority decision by that committee. The committee went further and by majority vote suggested that the British Guyana Constitution should provide a form of government patterned after the British parliamentary system. Following on this request, the Constitutional Conference of March 1960 was held. At this conference, I pressed strongly for immediate independence within the Commonwealth. We did not succeed in this, yet From our point of view, the conference was not a loss, for it was stated that the principle of independence for British Guyana was accepted. Since this last conference, the political map of the world has changed very significantly. The pace of advance from dependence to independent status has been rapid. Almost the whole of British colonial Africa has been free and sovereign. In our own area, our neighbors, Trinidad and Jamaica, have become independent sovereign states. In Guyana, independence was a major issue at the August 1961 elections. The opposition parties, in appealing to the electorate, made it clear that whichever party won the election would be leading the country to independence. One of these parties actually suggested May 31, 1962 as Independence date. It was in this spirit that in November 1961, shortly after the formation of my government, under the 1960 Constitution, a resolution was introduced and passed in both houses, requesting Her Majesty government grant us independence in 1962. Our right to independence has already been conceded by Her Majesty government. Now that this conference has been called, the question therefore before us is the transfer of residual power from Her Majesty government to the government of British Guyana and the fixing of a date for independence. I submit, sir, that the struggle for power between various political factions at home should not properly form part of the deliberations of this conference. Rather, my government conceives this to be a domestic matter to be hammered out at home. End of quote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me for such an extensive quote. Interestingly enough, history is repeating itself as we observe the 50th anniversary of Guyana being granted independence. Much can be said on all sides about the role of different parties and governments in their respective tenure in office during these last 50 years. What I believe is critical in helping us to move forward is for all sides of the House to undertake an initiative where we can assess frankly, based on the written and oral history, as well as the declassified information by the U.S. State Department on the role of outside interference and influence in dividing our country along ethnic lines. Unless we can have this meaningful engagement in whatever form or shape to put to rest the hurt and resentment, we will forever be haunted by the past, which, if not dealt with soon enough, will become distorted. Mr. Speaker, we were informed by the Minister that Budget 2016 is anchored on the 5 pillars outlined in His Excellency New Year's speech. I wish to deal with one of those pillars, which is national unity. The leaders of the PPP, led by Dr. Chetty Jagan and Forbes Burnham, were united in their quest to defeat our colonial masters, who for their part were not going to give us independence on a golden platter. They made sure that the divide and rule policy was part of their legacy given to us. National unity, Mr. Speaker, cannot be imposed. Neither can there be a time frame. It is time-consuming and painstaking work, which over time will see result. National unity can only thrive in an environment where people feel that their needs and their concerns are treated with the requisite understanding. When the democratic forces in the late 80s explored the options of working together, they realized that even though they had in common the need to remove the government of the day, there were many hurdles to overcome. Subsequently, the PPPC alliance was formed to contest the election of '92. When the results of the elections were announced, Dr. Cheddi Jagan cautioned his supporters not to engage in any celebration. Many could not understand this advice because they felt that having suffered all manner of transgression for more than 28 years, they should have had the opportunity to celebrate since the yoke of misery was lifted off their backs. Again, he reminded them that in every election there will be winners and losers, and that the party must avoid triumphalism because we had a nation to build. Having emerged from a period of party paramountcy, the PPP government recognized that in order to build cohesion, the symbols of the country must be used to unify rather than divide. They ensured that some of the building blocks required to build a cohesive society were laid. Mr. Speaker, the present government has established a Ministry of Social Cohesion, whose mandate was very vague, and where no resources were allocated. Questions to ascertain the way in which the ministry would undertake its work were not very clear. There exists a number of important commissions, such as the Ethnic Relations Commission, the Commission on Family, the Commission on Elderly, Commission on People with Disabilities, the Women and Gender Equality Commission, the Rights of the Child Commission, the Indigenous People Commission, the Human Rights Commission, the Law and Order Commission, as well as the 4 parliamentary sectoral committee on natural resources, social sector, economic services, and international relations committee, the interreligious organization, and very shortly, I hope, the Procurement Commission. All of these entities have wide mandates, and they are made up of a wide cross-section of Guyanese, a cross-section of organizations, entities, and individuals. Once these entities are provided with the human and financial resources, they will be able to provide the building blocks for social cohesion. This cohesion we are desirous of building will not come out from the ministry which was created. Rather, it will be from the commissions and institutions which I have referred to. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the government of the day, while hoping to create social cohesion, has gone about it in the wrong way. I must refer back to a statement which I had expressed in my previous presentation in the last budget debate. When the PPPC government came to office in 1992, the public service was basically a PNC outfit. We knew that, but we chose not to remove the workers because at the end of the day, they were providing a service and they had families to feed. We did not go on vengeance to remove them and replace them with PPP supporters. Instead, we kept them, worked with them to improve their skills wherever necessary. Mr. Speaker, the division of labor and social stratification were tied up with the philosophy of our colonial masters. And it is by no accident that in order to have an education or a job, you had to change your religion or concur with the beliefs of the colonial master. That policy did not help the integration process, so it was only natural for certain ethnic groups to be classified in a specific way. An assessment of the public service, the police force, for all social sectors would have a bias to one group, and the agricultural and productive sector would see another bias. Over time, all groups wanted their offsprings to have better education, and it was only a matter of time before they were prepared academically and socially to offer their skills in the public sector. Thus, a new situation emerged where all groups in society were vying for opportunities in the public service which historically were available to one group in the main. The challenge we face as a nation, Mr. Speaker, is to find ways and means of ensuring that all groups have opportunity to be part of government jobs. We cannot expect the same from the private sector, since they will ultimately choose who they consider is the most suitable, who they consider is most suitable for that position. Thus, with your action in removing those professionals from their positions, you are not helping the trust of national unity or social cohesion, but you have created more disunity and the perception that only one group have the right to be employed in the public service and the few others who are there are mere window dressing. Mr. Speaker, we have listened ad nauseum to the rantings of some of the honorable members who, when in opposition, beg your pardon, I withdraw rantings. We have listened to the, beg your pardon? Sorry, we have listened to the, sorry. We have listened to the ramblings of some of the honorable members who, when in opposition, spoke about expansive government. So I decided to do a comparative analysis and an assessment of the first 5 years of the PPPC in office in comparison to the 9 months of the coalition. And what did I find? From 1993 to 1996, I did not find any record of contract workers. However, in 1997, there were 27 contract workers in 5 ministries. These ministries were Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs, Ministry of Trade, Tourism and Industry, Ministry of Public Works and Communication, and the Ministry of Local Government. In 9 months of the new government, an evaluation of the Office of the President and Ministry of the Presidency will find that in 2015 there were 596 contracted workers, and in 2006 there are 1,004. From 1992 to 1997 there were 16 ministers. In 1994 there was an addition. In 1996 there were 2 more additions. At no time there were more than 19 ministers. And thus we had two presidential advisors in the first 5 years. Presently, we have 27 ministers and a whole plethora of advisors. I do hope at an appropriate time we will be informed of the exact number. And this was the first 5 years of the PPPC in government. What we would like to know, Mr. Speaker, is how much of these contract workers are retirees. We are aware that retirees are already in receipt of their pensions, which are exempt from tax, as well as their gratuity, and which is also tax-free. In perusing the expenditure for the ministry department, 4 ministries stand out in capital expenditure, with the Ministry of Public Infrastructure 23.336 billion, or a 59% increase, topping the list. Since the government has been touting the mantra of good government, good governance and accountability, I would like to know how soon we can expect the setting up of the Public Procurement Commission. How soon will government amend the regulations to the Procurement Act to require the posting of the National Procurement Tender Administration Board website of all contracts exceeding $1.5 million? What will be the role of the Office of the Auditor General? Or will we see the selection of accounting forms as well as the case of forensic audits? Mr. Speaker, the government in their election campaign spoke much about accountability, transparency, and corruption. We expect them to absorb all the requirements relating to these pronouncements. Thus, I would like to know how soon we can expect some answers regarding the complaint against the acting CEO of GPL. I had also expected the Minister of Health, who spoke earlier to have informed this Honorable House about the latest circumstances of the newly appointed chairman of the GPHC. Perhaps Honorable Dr. Norton will provide that update at a later stage. Also, Mr. Speaker, the public should be apprised of the process leading up to the client of one of the ministers having the go-ahead to undertake the work of the specialty hospital. There is an allegation of a certain minister who is encouraging some CEOs to do single sourcing of security services without going through public tender. There are also allegations of interference in the awards of contracts. If these allegations are true, then it goes against the promise you made of being accountable and transparent. Mr. Speaker, a good life. I am pleased with yet another cleanup campaign undertaken by the government in the city of Georgetown. Rip Van Winkle has risen from his slumber and has advised his followers that now is the time for them to wake up after 23 years. There is alacrity in the steps, and yes, the city looks nice in some of the areas where the work was done. It is said that the MMC waived $40 million from a certain business and that no payment was made for a number of years. From what was reported, the sum owed was $500 million. And only a few months ago, efforts were made to recoup some of the payments. This is a story of MCC of Georgetown, who had responsibility for the affairs of the city most of the time, except for a brief period by the IMC. The MMC officials are guilty of encouraging street vending. They are guilty of erecting small shacks on some streets and in the mall. They are guilty of shaking down businesses and vendors alike. Ask the vendors of the different markets and they will tell you how much they have to give to the city constabulary on a weekly basis. And what about the nearly 900 staff who have been employed to oversee the work of the city? Even though previous government had provided millions of dollars, it seemed as if the money was going through a black hole. Why suddenly has the MNCC found its motivation for cleaning and beautifying the city? Isn't that what they should have always been doing? The story tells the mindset of how a government can try to do its best to improve one part of the country, but is faced with non-cooperation by the politicians who are hell-bent on embarrassing the government by inertia and spite. So much for patriotism and love for country. And guess who was in charge of the municipality? Your guess is as good as mine. We heard yesterday in the presentation of some of the regional representatives about the difficulties they encounter while trying to manage the region's affairs. These actions are counterproductive to the country's development and will stagnate, and we will stagnate as a nation if we continue in this way. Mr. Speaker, since the presentation of the budget of January 29, I made a special effort to get the views of a cross-section of Guyanese workers, farmers, hire car drivers, housewives, some small businesses, and even some shopkeepers. And there is one common agreement among all of them, and that is things bad and money not circulating. There are some who said they voted for change, and within weeks of the new administration coming into power, they saw the signs of what was to come. One young woman who was an ardent fan of the AFC expressed disgust with the manner in which some of its leaders were treated, as well as the violation of some important aspects of the Cummingsburg Accord. A farmer from Blackbush Folder, who along with 2 members of his family voted for change because he thought the promise of $6,000 for a bag was real. He has now expressed a desire to go away in the US, but was reminded by his friends that should Trump win the presidency, he will be sent right back home. The announcement by the government regarding the new measures for the importation of vehicles and tires is not going down well with many. While the argument of making the country green is something which is desirable in the long term, I do believe your timing is way out of bounds. You cannot impose these measures in an environment when the economy is not doing well and expect that the 126 taxation measures will garner the resources to manage the country. Mr. Speaker, over the years, the taxi service became viable because citizens were able to get a loan from the banks to buy a reconditioned or a second-hand car. With the establishment of taxi services throughout the country, many persons were able to buy a car, pay their loan, pay their base, and take care of their families. The measures you are imposing by restrictions on both cars and tires will hamper the livelihood of these persons who are using their taxi for gainful employment. I was told, Mr. Speaker, by the taxi driver to tell the government you're deaf on stupidness. And as I'm on the subject of the good life, how can we speak of the good life when thousands of workers and their families are worried about their future existence and well-being following the decision taken by this current new AFC administration to close down the Wales estate?
Honourable Member, you have 4 minutes remaining.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to at the same time ask for her 5 minutes so that she'll have her full time. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Honourable Member. Honourable Member, you will speak for 5 additional minutes,
Thank
which
you,
will
sir.
allow you to speak for 35 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, on the 5th of February, 60 workers were given marching orders by Guy Suko, even though the minister had indicated that workers of Whale Estate should not be worried since their jobs are not on the line. On the 8th of February, another 50 planters were reportedly told by Guy Suko officials that if they did not take up employment at Iflop Estate and did not agree to accept severance pay within employment at Iflop Estate, within 3 days, it would be regarded by Guy Suko that they have opted to leave the estate employed. It seems to me that colonial days have come again. And to add insult to injury, the population is faced with bandits invading their homes, taking not only their lifelong savings, but taking their lives as well. It seems to me and others that there is a price that you pay for working hard and accumulating something for your old age. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence once more to respond to Honourable Minister Valerie Patterson yesterday when she spoke disparagingly about the housing sector. I have had the honor as one of the first minister of the PPPC government to have been involved in this process. And I want to share some information for those who don't recall, and especially for the minister's information. In April 1993, Dr. Cheddi Jagan called his Minister of Agriculture, his Ministers of Labour, Human Service, Social Security and Housing, as well as Guy Suko, and said to us, I want you to go and find all the abandoned sugarcane lands that are not in use, because we need to get involved in a housing drive. And that is based on the PPPC manifesto. That land had always been there. And what we did is to take that land, and with the limited money that was available at that time, we plowed the land. We plowed all the land that was there, that was abandoned, was not in the use of sugar. we plowed that land and started the process of allocating pieces of land to the Guyanese people. It may not have been done at that time in the way we were hoping to have it, that is with concrete drains and all of that. Because if you live in a donkey cart economy, how can you live in a Cadillac lifestyle? The money was there, the money was not there. We had just come into office. The Ministry of Housing was closed down. There was no allocation for the housing sector. And thus we had to start with what we have to begin the process of allocating lands to people. What did we do? We look at all those people who had more than 4 children, because we realize when you have a lot of children, it is impossible for you to go out there to find renters. People do not want to rent a home to people with a lot of children. And thus, in the system that we employed, people with more than 2 children were given priority. Additionally, we also work with the private sector. So what we sought to do, the lands that were at the front, we sold them at a higher price so that we can do the development for the people who are behind those lots. In that process, land was sold at $58,000, and people were given they were allowed to pay 3 installments in 18 months. Now tell me, what was wrong with something like that in an environment when you didn't have the money, when the Ministry of Housing was closed down, and the people were so poor, and we could not have, done all the things we wanted to do. And you have to remember, Mr. Speaker, that we came from an environment in which the people of this country were promised that they will be housed, they would be fed, they would be clothed. And that was just a broken promise. So I cannot understand how my honorable colleague, the Minister of Housing, in such a disparaging way can knock a process that was something that everyone in Guyana had looked forward to. The expectations, the hope that we created for the poor people in this country was overwhelming. Every day in the Ministry of Housing, hundreds of people were lining up to get an application forms. And when you look at what we were able to do in the first 5 years of the PPPC taking office, it was remarkable. I remember going to conferences overseas and talking to people about the housing drive, and many people will say, can we come to Guyana to also buy a piece of land, because they have never heard about a piece of land being sold at that time was about 250 Guyana dollars. US dollars. Mr. Speaker, development, as we know, in an environment when you don't have the resources will have to be done incrementally. And that is what the PPPC started out to do.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, sir. And that is what the PPPC has sought to do. And I must tell you, there are people all over this country, thousands and thousands, more than 100,000 people got home. And you can walk the length and breadth of this country, and people will talk about how this government, the PPPC government, giving them a piece of land, what a difference it has made to their lives, because somehow they have hope. They have something to hold on to. Before they had nothing. And so I would really like to encourage the Honorable Valerie Patterson to read the IDB report on the housing sector. It is something that all of us should be proud of. And I do hope that in the next 5 years, we will see comparable development the same way we have started, because as was said before, every government will undertake a number of initiatives, and it is expected that the others that follow will either make it better or make it worse. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that unfortunately I would not be able to support the budget as presented by the Minister of Finance, because we believe that this budget do not have the answers to move this country forward. And therefore, the theme of the budget do not find favor with us, because I believe it will make the people in this country much poorer, and the good life that we're hoping to have, we will not have a good life. I see a lot of problems ahead for the people of this country, and I travel every day with taxis 2-3 times a day. Every taxi driver has the same story to tell, and every person you go in the Stabroek and Border Market, they have the same story to tell. So it's not a poor people budget, and I do believe that what you are hoping to do will only bring the poor people in this country more poverty and more starvation.
I remember your time is up.
Thank you.